Well, here we are again, commiserating, not talking about what, I guess we are talking about what could have been, what should have been, what would have been, coulda, woulda, shoulda with the Bengals 2024 season. It's not absolutely dead, John Sheeran, but it is, it's on the operating table, I guess, is one metaphor to use. I mean, it is not looking good after the Bengals suffer yet another devastating loss, not only in the division, but at the hands of the Pittsburgh Steelers and at home. I'm Anthony Cosenza. As I mentioned, I'm joined as always by the brains of this operation, John Sheeran. John, hope you had a good Thanksgiving, buddy. We talked a little bit about that before we took the air. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving, despite the exciting yet devastating loss that we witnessed on Sunday.
I had a great Thanksgiving. It was great because we barely even talked about the Bengals, because I think everyone just kind of knows what it is. But I mean, you're at the point where you're shopping for urns. You know, like Joe Burrow's face is going to be on.
Man.
I mean, not to be morbid, but like we all know what like it's on life support at this point. It's just
you're buying your funeral plot. I mean, is that what?
Yeah.
Boy, we got real dark. It's and Halloween's way gone here. So anyway, I don't know how we got there, but that is essentially where the Bengals season is right now. I mean, it is just each week becomes more and more inexplicable. The defensive performances that we witness are just horrendous. It looks like, basically either nobody knows where they're going and or nobody really wants to tackle, nobody wants to cover. And the Steelers had their way on offense aside from a pick six. Which, by the way, I know a lot of people complained about with that was illegal contact or whatnot. I saw Pickens kind of stumble to the ground before that whole contact was taking place. So I kind of was like, I get that there was hands on the helmet, but he was like tripped off the line and fell forward. So I actually like the no call on that. Maybe you can call me a homer on that if you want. But regardless, John, let's talk about this because once again, Big Brother, the bully down the block, whatever, kind of takes it to you. There was a physicality. You kind of knew that this was going to be yet another George Pickens breakout game. Russell Wilson played one of the best games I've seen him play in a really long time. And the Bengals just did not have a lot of answers. They had a lot on offense, but yet again score over 30 points and lose this season. What are they now? 1-7 in one possession games going in this season. Just unbelievable. And when you have 7 losses by one possession games, and you have 8 on the season, that is just crushing. That is just absolutely crushing as a storyline for your season.
It's not just like these have been like close games throughout this game was a little bit unique, I guess. But I mean, just thinking about it, these games wouldn't be close if the Bengals offense was anything less than what they've been. Like these would be blowouts. If you're giving up like 37 points to the Steelers and then 7 of them comes via a strip sack return for a touchdown, like it puts more emphasis on the offense to be perfect, which is a motif that has been repeated ad nauseum this season. And that it was just another example of this week. And it all starts with the defense. It's been the defense's problem for the majority of these last 3 months, but just watching how they attacked the Pittsburgh offense and just dropping back into deep Tampa 2 and just Russell Wilson just taking check down after check down after check down, and then no one's able to corral the ball carrier. They're not making tackles in space. Jermaine Pratt looks like he's got cement for shoes. it was just an exercise of Pittsburgh just taking what was given to them. And as soon as the Bengals went into man coverage, whether it was that cover zero or Mike Hilton trying to carry a seam route on Calvin Austin, Russell Wilson is still one of the better deep passers in the league. So the Bengals knew how Pittsburgh could beat them in that sense. So they shelled out and entirely to just drop back deep and just let everything kind of come to them. And it still didn't work out because obviously they don't have the athletes to drop back into deep space and then come up to the ball carrier, make a stop for, somewhat of a short gain. Like that's just how the Steelers were able to operate all throughout the game. And you knew at the end of the first half, the Bengals are going to need to score 40 points again at home in order to have a chance at winning. It's inexcusable.
It was a real cat and mouse type of thing, and part of it played out on Hard Knocks, which we'll talk about that in just a few minutes as well. But what I mean by that is you make a great point. I mean, I mentioned that Russell Wilson played a great game, and he did, despite the pick six and some other things. But I mean, the checkdowns, yes, that was a major part of the game, and you could tell that the Bengals defense, Lou Anarumo, was saying, okay, we're going to let you have that. We're going to let you have those. We'll try and tackle your guys in space. We're not going to let Pickens beat us deep. We're not going to let Austin beat us deep. We're not going to let the deep ball, define us on defense this week. And then finally, it became it was, well, we'll take what you're giving us for the Pittsburgh Steelers on offense. And it just led to touchdown drives. And so ultimately we got to stop the bleeding this way. So then you move up, you try and guard that. And then what happens? You go over the top, what you originally designed your defense to defend against this week. It ends up killing you because either, if you want to call it impatience, ineffectiveness, both, whatever, it came to kill you. Now, putting the defense aside for 1 second, and yes, they are the primary culprit on things. This is what irritated me the most about this game is it is still about the Steelers pass rush. It is still about TJ Watt making a havoc of a play. It is still about that despite what the Bengals don't do on the offensive line. They got pressure from multiple spots. Again, Herbig filling in for Highsmith. Watt making a devastating play. Again, this kind of stuff was talked about a little bit on Hard Knocks. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But defense, yes. Maddening to watch the Bengals defense operate or not operate the way that it should. But also, it to me, it's just the same type of things that kill you against the Steelers. It's that one timely turnover. It's the fumble six, pick six, big play by TJ Watt, or some combination of all of the above. And they cannot eliminate that on any kind of consistent basis, despite making personnel moves that you perceive to be remedies for that.
Yeah. Right before the game started, you saw that Cody Ford was going to start this game over Cordell Volson, and you knew that Orlando Brown Jr. was going to be able to play. So you figured that you had an advantage at pass protection compared to what it had been in weeks prior when Cody Ford was a left tackle and Cordell Volson was a left guard. Cody Ford, I think, held up fine for most of the game. Unfortunately, Cam Hayward is Cam Hayward, and he eventually, got through at the end there. And Orlando Brown Jr., as we saw as the game kind of went on, he was clearly playing through pain. He was clearly playing through that injury. And that's when the Nick Herbig strip sack happened later in the game. And you had a pass protection unit that was still not enough against the Steelers pass rush without Alex Highsmith. I thought Amarius Mims did a really good job for most of the game against TJ Watt, but you knew as the game was going on, Watt is inevitable. At some point, he's going to make his presence known. And it was on that scramble drill where Joe Burrow was looking downfield and he didn't feel Watt was behind him. Boom, another strip sack there. So yes, the Steelers defense is always inevitable in just creating that one play. And this time wasn't TJ Watt who got the tip pass interception. It was Herbig who got the tip pass and it went off of T. Higgins' hands. And that was Joe Burrow's 5th interception of the game. And I think in the beginning of the game, when the Bengals had the lead because of that pick six from Cam Taylor-Britt, they were featuring Chase Brown. Like Chase Brown nearly scored a 40-yard touchdown. So they were trying to go with the run game. And I think they did what we wanted them to and have somewhat of a balanced attack. But unfortunately, when your defense continues to just let up scoring drive after scoring drive, that put the Bengals offensive script into just the pass only type of mindset. And that allowed the Steelers pass rush to just gain momentum as the game kind of went on. So it was the exact opposite of what they needed to do because unfortunately they did go away from the run game because they needed to continue scoring points and their offensive line is not equipped to run block for 4 quarters straight. So it was the recipe for disaster just because this defense continues to just be incompetent and they just don't have Like their offense is carried by Joe Burrow being Superman, and they don't have the infrastructure outside of that to maintain any type of sustainability.
Joe Burrow hasn't thrown less than 25 passes in a game this year. He's largely in the 30s, mostly around the high 30s. He was at 38 this last week. And like you said, when you're dropping back close to 40 times, TJ Watt making a play is, despite who you have on the offensive line, it's, a risk you're going to take. Despite all of that, I mean, Burrow has had a number of games well into the 60% in terms of completion percentage, well into 70%. He was at almost 74% this last week, dipped 56% against the Chargers, but and it's 60% against Cleveland, which, by the way, that Cleveland game, which was a win, was his lowest amount of pass attempts. But I mean, my point in bringing all of that up is he's throwing the ball a ton. He's still rising to the occasion in terms of completion percentage. And throwing that ball that amount of times and only having 5 interceptions on the season is pretty incredible. Again, this game just encapsulates not only this season, but it encapsulates this rivalry. It encapsulates the division. It encapsulates just how far the fall from grace has been from the Bengals since 2022. They were competitive last year. Burrow got hurt. Who knows what would have happened? But again, the model of consistency that the Pittsburgh Steelers have, the way that they design their team, their ability to get players from all different kinds of rounds in the draft and have them be effective pass rushers from different spots. It's something where you go, what is missing here from the Cincinnati Bengals to recreate this? And I put out this tweet, I guess it was a little bit out of anger on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, saying, if I'm the Bengals, you can obsess about Mahomes and the Chiefs. You can look at the Ravens, and rightfully so. But I mean, I would just really try and emulate almost everything that the Pittsburgh Steelers do as an organization. I mean, whether that's personnel, whether that's, really emphasize the trenches, reevaluate your coaching staff and your personnel decision-making process, all of that. I just feel like it should be an obsession at this point, because the Pittsburgh Steelers, despite whatever you think about their quarterbacks, despite whenever you think the chips are down and they're going to be a bad team, they almost never are. I marvel at this team this year, the Steelers team that is now 9-3, I think. We thought they'd be hot garbage. We thought they would be hot garbage this year. I mean, at least that was kind of the general consensus. And here they are fighting for one of the top seeds in the AFC once again, because of the way they run their team, because of the way that they emphasize certain positions and certain strategies on a football team.
They know what to look for in the trenches. They don't always hit with offensive linemen. They consistently hit with defensive linemen because they draft good players out of college. Keanu Ben, Nick Hairberg, TJ Watt, obviously. Cameron Hayward, I want to correct myself. Cameron Hayward is the guy who got the tip pass interception. Surprise, surprise, making plays. The Bengals draft types along the defensive line, specifically in terms of physical stature and measurables. They don't draft pass rushing win percentage. They don't draft guys who consistently finish around the quarterback. And that's why 90% of this defensive line can't rush the passer, can't get off a block in one-on-one situations. And this game was no different. Russell Wilson, we talked about it before this game. He had been taking an inordinate amount of sacks in recent weeks relative to how much he's been pressured. Did he get sacked once in this game? I mean, I think it's like once or twice. It wasn't enough, clearly. And of course, it's a parasitic relationship. If the pass rush doesn't get home and you don't have a secondary that can hold up and is consistently out of position, what are you left with except George Pickens and Calvin Austin and Pat Freiermuth just getting wide open against you and consistently making plays? Like, if you just watch the tape, like you would figure that Russell Wilson was his prime Seattle self, because this defense, there's just nothing there. Like, they don't have athletes. They don't have guys who can win consistently, and they're consistently out of position, man. It's like you said, it's a difference in the Steelers knowing what to look for when they bring in guys, and the Bengals clearly are stuck in very archaic ways where they feel like they can just draft specific physical types and just mold them into the players that they want. But you have to be good at football first, and they haven't drafted enough of those guys.
Yeah, and it feels it was a little bit more so in the Marvin era than the Zach Taylor era, but it feels like there's still this well, let's draft a tweener player in the trenches and try and mold them into either, they did a little bit of this in college, a little bit of this in college. This is what we need them to do with us. So let's try it out. Whereas the Steelers say, this is what we look for out of our edge defenders. This is specifically the guy we like. Other people may not. If you remember TJ Watt coming out, there are a lot of people that weren't overly high on him because they were like, oh, it's just JJ's little brother. He's getting a little bit more hype than he should. He didn't have the same kind of stature, and JJ was, all world at that point in the league. People like TJ Watt, but he was what a mid late first round, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
right?
like 30th overall, something like that.
So I mean, he was not looked at all really the same way as JJ, and here he is. You can make the argument, and maybe almost somewhat easily, that he is better than JJ Watt was as a pro. I mean, and so they say, well, you don't like this guy as much. We love them for what we need them to fit to do here. And the Bengals are like, well, like you said, we like this guy's attributes. We like some of the tape. Let's take a tackle, Cordell Volson, and make him, a big guard, right? I mean, you could go the Marcus Hardison. I mean, all of these guys that they tried to do all kinds of different things with the defensive line. Remember the whole Jason Shirley thing where you're like, man, what are you doing with it? Yeah. It feels like that kind of stuff is what the Bengals are trying to do. And they try and create this Frankenstein monster out of, a really either physically imposing college player and try and make them what they feel they need, instead of, hey, this is our system. Let's find the right guys who fit. Let's find productive guys. Let's find athletes and make sure that they fit our system. And it feels like there's just a disconnect between what the Steelers do and what the Bengals do in that regard. And it Bengals have hit. There's no doubt about it. They've hit on some players. There's no doubt, but it feels like the Steelers they're so consistent about that. And once again, this game kind of reminded me of it, particularly when you're getting pressure from multiple spots on the defensive line.
I mean, you just have to look like the last the last decent Bengals defensive tackle drafted was Geno Atkins. Like, Chris Jenkins has a chance to be the next guy. He clearly isn't there yet. The last decent edge rusher the Bengals have drafted in terms of rushing the passer, because Sam Hubbard, that's not really his forte. The last guy of that was probably Carl Lawson. And he was, again, this tweener who didn't always fit in the scheme and, had some injury issues and whatnot. So they've just whiffed so constantly on that side of the trenches, on top of their whiffs on the offensive line. And it's not just rushing the passer too, because the Steelers offensive line ran all over the Bengals defensive line in certain spots. Like, Najee Harris had so much room to cut back on some of those runs. Like, I think it was the third touchdown of the game where it was just very evident. And that's Steelers offensive line, Siumulo, rookie Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, like great athletes who won a lot in college at those specific positions. It's just plug and play for them because they just know what they're looking for. And the Bengals, they're just not there.
Yeah, and I mean, you could make the example, one of the most prime examples of just next up for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They had Joey Porter, who was an excellent edge guy. Move on from him, and then you got James Harrison to deal with, and it's just boom, next in line. Here's the assembly line of another player that we draft and develop, and they become an insanely productive player. Wherein I don't know that many other places some of these guys would have the same success that they had with the Pittsburgh Steelers, just because, like you said, they know what they're looking for, and it feels like other teams, particularly the Bengals, that's not always the case. And I guess it's easy to point that out in a season like this that is extremely disappointing. We're going to talk about Hard Knocks in just a second. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. We're talking Cincinnati Bengals here on the Orange and Black Insider, part of the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, along with many other shows, Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends. They've had some pretty nice guests the last few weeks, so go check that out. 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz. And of course, you can get our content and some of the 3 and Out stuff on our YouTube channel. You got to go underneath John and by that SB Nation icon to subscribe. The show icon there, click that, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. Give us a thumbs up if you like what we're doing there. We also stream live on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page and to a number of different Twitter streams. We appreciate you tuning in live or getting the show after the fact. So please go do that and resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy. We've been seeing a little bit of a jump there in terms of subscribers and downloads and all that kind of stuff. So that's great to see. But if you subscribe to our past audio channel, please do so again. Leave us a review there. That helps us out. So I believe you watched Hard Knocks, John. Did you not?
I did.
Yeah. So otherwise, this would probably make for a really short segment, right? If we didn't watch it. So I did as well. I've got some different takeaways and observations and things like that I saw between the two teams, between the coaches, between other things going on in this particular episode. I thought it was a pretty neat thing that they're chronicling one of, if not the best division in football, despite some of the records of the Bengals and the Browns. But I thought it was a really unique watching experience. Aside from that, what did you gather either from the Bengals, the Steelers, or both when you watched that? We're not going to talk about the other teams, but this specific thing, particularly as we saw what unfolded on Sunday.
A couple things stood out. The first that was noticeable to me was listening to how the head coaches kind of addressed their team. I feel like with Mike Tomlin, like he doesn't really give a lot of pressers. He's kind of almost like an a-hole a little bit. He just throws questions back at your face. You don't really see like who Mike Tomlin truly is in public, but seeing him address his team and just be just completely real and intense, like you can tell like how he galvanizes so much support from his players for like 6. Were you about to say the same thing?
Yes, I was. Go ahead.
Just in comparison to Zach Taylor, who again, like I think he does a really good job at his pressers, but it seems like he says the same thing to us as he says to his players. It's always like, oh, what a great opportunity this is, this is the exact game that you kind of wish for and everything like that. And it kind of does support my theory that like his messaging doesn't really change whether or not the team is winning or losing. And again, it's not everything that we're seeing necessarily behind closed doors, but this is as close as we're going to get. And it just seems like there's a difference between the way that Tomlin leads and the way that Zach leads. And again, maybe it's unfair because we're not seeing it all, but it just almost kind of confirmed my suspicion about how Zach kind of conducts himself in these spots, and how I can see that sometimes it doesn't always appear genuine necessarily. And maybe there's just not enough flexibility in his repertoire to address and really connect with his team when times are definitely tough like this, because he it's almost like he just speaks as if everything is kind of okay. And there's not a lot of urgency. It's just kind of like the same message. Whereas with Mike Tomlin, the team's 8-3, it's very intense. It's very real. It makes sense why he consistently gets the most out of his players.
You hit the nail on the head, in my opinion, here, and I'll add to that a little bit. I don't want to sound like a broken record. First of all, I want to say a couple of things, disclaimers for what you and I are talking about here. Number one, the Steelers won the game, so I think despite whatever, Hard Knocks is probably going to paint them in a little more favorable light, maybe give them a little more coverage. Sure. They're a better team at this point, all of that. They're a more storied franchise. There's all kinds of different things. As you said, this is probably for schlubs like us, this is probably about as deep behind the curtain that many of us get to look at in terms of how teams address their players, etc. So, I don't want to say it was an unfair light that was cast on the Bengals, Zach Taylor, coaching staff, etc. But from what was portrayed, I am in pretty much full agreement with everything you just said, and and by the way, John and I do prepare for the show. John and I, talk about, hey, what do we want to talk about this week, et cetera, et cetera. I'd like to think that since we've been doing this for a while and we do it live, we go off the cuff a little bit, but we know what we're going to say for the most part a little bit. And we don't do a ton of pre-production or a ton of pre-meeting before our shows, especially since we do, sometimes a couple a week, a few a week, that sort of thing. But we didn't really talk about exactly what we were going to say here. But like I said, I'm in near full agreement, if not full agreement, with what you just said. And it feels like to me that when your team is winning, Zach's message resonates well. Zach's approach that he said resonates well. It's, hey, it's the rah-rah, it's high energy and positivity and optimism. And hey, we got a good opportunity this week. And even if we lost last week, we still have a good record and we got a good bounce back game. This is AFC North. It's a little more cheery and that sort of thing. Whereas I don't want to say there's a lack of accountability in the approach there, but what I saw, if I am going to nitpick, what I saw was Tomlin saying, Herbig, you're going up against Zeus this week. Need you. Need to play. Guess what happened? Now, was it just a fluke thing that happened? Maybe not. I saw a guy who was extremely complimentary and knows what's going on with his opposition star players. And he expressed that to his coaching staff and to his team. Now, granted, those star players still made a lot of plays against Tomlin and the Steelers, namely Chase, Burrow, etc. But he knew what was going on there. And it was, hey, guys, it's not like, hey, what a great opportunity. It's, we got to be on our game. And it's specific names calling people out. You got to be on your game. You got to be on your game. We got to be, we can't let this happen. We can't let this happen. It's a little bit of that grab you by the jersey type of thing, metaphorically speaking, whereas it's the other one's kind of rah. All right, let's go, guys. Let's go, team. And I feel like, while I don't think that's an ineffective approach from Zach Taylor, I feel like it doesn't have the same effectiveness if you're 8-4 as you are with 4-8. And I see why Tomlin has never had a losing season as a head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I see it. It was obvious. And they've gone through a number of different quarterbacks since Ben Roethlisberger left. And even the last 2 years of Big Ben weren't that great. And yet still they maintain high levels of competitiveness. They've made the playoffs. They haven't had a losing season. I get it. I've seen a lot of Tomlin in press conferences, like you said. I've heard him talk, and you kind of go, "Oh man, I mean, intense guy, whatever." But then you saw it on the sideline too, John, when Pickens fell on that pick six, and he got in. It was intense, but it was, hey, this isn't going to define the game. Let's go. I need you, because he realizes that guy, as talented as he is, he's a head case a bit, right? I mean, and I think that may be being kind about it, but he knows his players and he knows how to approach the game, and its intensity. It is cheering. It is, hey, need you. It's calling players out by name, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they just painted him in a different light this week than Zach Taylor, but I just felt a disparity there.
Oh, and it wasn't just Pickens. It was Cam Hayward at halftime, like walking off the field. Like, he took like 2 minutes to just talk to him and kind of get up in his face. Like, hey, like, Joe is like killing us from the pocket. We need to step up in there. We need to avoid him from escaping. And it was just constantly relaying that message. And of course, Cam Hayward had a phenomenal second half. There's no complacency with Mike and his coaching style. And I think, if we're going to talk about the rest of the series and whatnot, there is that disclaimer of, we don't know what gets edited out, we don't know what doesn't make the cut necessarily. But I can't imagine that Max, in their efforts to make this as entertaining as possible, is cutting out anything that's any like intense moment necessarily from any coaching staff. Like, they want the most interesting aspects and the most interesting nuggets that they can possibly use. So if Zach was kind of in guys' face and was changing his messaging a little bit, we probably would have seen it. And there was also a contrast, I think, because Dan Pitcher now, addressed the team pretty regularly on Monday meetings as well. We kind of saw a glimpse of that. And there was a little bit more passion in the way that he was kind of addressing. There's a little bit more. You could sense there was some accountability there. And there was a difference, I think, between the way the Pitcher addressed the team and Taylor. And again, very small sample size, but you think a lot of these things and you kind of hear, rumors about, what people are saying, how people feel about these guys. And it kind of showed itself a little bit. There was also that Cleveland coach, I think it was the assistant offensive line coach, who was just going in about everything. It was just like a do or die type of situation with the offensive line, and just addressing Jameis like head on, like, get the ball out quickly, like, we don't want you to get hurt, get the ball out quickly, go through your reads and everything. Like, Jameis like, yes sir, like, every coach is different, every style is different as well. But it really did seem like this was the first step in confirming a lot of things that we kind of knew about a lot of these guys.
It feels like this is this should be a season with not every moment or whatever, because if you do it all the time, it's like, come on. But it feels like this should be a Zach Taylor, and maybe not his colorful language, but be an effing pro Marvin Lewis, Hard Knocks type of moment where it's like, man, I am sick and tired of what I'm seeing around here. Maybe he has done something like that to his coaching staff, to some players. I don't know. Like you said, I tend to think if it happens sometime this week, we would have seen something similar to that. It feels like, though Tomlin didn't go that explosive as we saw Marvin Lewis in that, that clip type of thing, it feels like there's that innate intensity, that innate, this is a big game. Need you to perform. We can't have this. We got to have this. Got to have it. And it felt like to me, the Steelers and Tomlin, the way they approached the week, it felt like they were focusing. And I don't know if I'm going to word this well, but I felt like they were really focusing outwardly on Bengals stars, Bengals players, and how to stop them. Whereas the Bengals, the message of the week was, what a great opportunity for us. What a great opportunity for us to play. And it didn't feel like, hey, Pickens. There was a little bit of that, right? I mean, they talked about Pickens, and I don't know. There was just a disconnect on the approach, the attitude, the intensity. It felt like to me, and I guess that's easy to say when the team is 4-8 now, lost this game instead of a different trajectory and a different result on Sunday.
On a more positive note, Joe Burrow has a Batmobile on the way. Awesome. But it was cool seeing, because like you don't see a ton of Joe's personality. He hides it pretty well. But seeing him talk about it with Chase and T, and making jokes about dressing up as Batman, going to the club with the cape and everything like that, that was cool. And that's to me like the true value of Hard Knocks and a lot of these behind the scenes is, these players are more or less robots in front of the camera with microphones in their face because they need to do that. Otherwise, people will use what they say against them. But these are like the real raw moments of these guys just being dudes and being friends and just chilling out in practice, things that we've all experienced playing sports, right? Just being with your friends, taking time off before you're going back in there. And these guys have been with each other for 4 years now. For Chase and Burrow has been going on 6 or 7. The friendships that they've kind of created, the somberness of realizing that trio is probably going to be split up after this year. So seeing that as many times as we can, I think is going to be great. And I hope they continue to kind of hone in on that dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too, and that's just an interesting dynamic wherein it's like, the difference of the Bengals is, a trio of stars or a couple of big guys, big name guys, household names, that sort of thing. And then the Steelers, it's like, oh yeah, he's pretty good. Oh yeah, he's pretty good. Oh yeah, he's pretty good. Oh yeah, him. And then a lot of other guys, and those, what is it? X's and O's versus Jimmy's and Joe's or whatever. Those guys just show up. They just show up every week. They show up and they make a play. And if it's not one of their quote unquote stars, it's another one of those role player guys. And when you saw him kind of pan across the room, sure, those of us who cover the NFL pretty regularly, we know Cam Hayward, we know TJ Watt, obviously, but everybody knows Joe Burrow, everybody knows Jamar Chase. And when you go to the Steelers, it's like, oh yeah, him. Oh, he's pretty good. Oh, he's pretty good. And it's just like a collection of a team heading in one direction, it felt like. And then a team that's kind of top heavy with some stars. And I don't know, that's just kind of a little takeaway that I had.
Yeah, and this episode was clearly centered around the Bengals and Steelers because they played. The Ravens had like a late game that Sunday, and obviously the Browns played on Monday night, so there wasn't, I think, any footage considering the episode came out less than 24 hours later after the game was over. Yeah. So I guess we'll see more of the Ravens and Browns next week, and with the Bengals playing on Monday night this week, they might get the Browns treatment this time. We might see some fallout from the game and the Steelers, and we'll see if the overall vibe and attitude is kind of diminished now that the playoff chances are in the toilet.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that here next because the Bengals have not only the Cowboys up, which should be a winnable game, but God only knows if that's actually true.
Winnable. That's
I
awesome.
mean, yeah. They've got a lot going on here, and we'll talk about the game a little bit, and we'll talk about some other things with it. But the kind of one of the more interesting facets of this game, and I don't know how this is going to work, is the whole Simpsons vibe that's happening around this thing. First time they are doing that. Apparently, I think it's going to be on Disney Plus, if I'm not mistaken, and a couple other platforms. But they're going to have a cartoonized version of this game or the players, or I'm not really sure fully how it's going to work, but I guess it brings a little levity to a season that desperately needs it, at least on the Bengals side.
I don't know if anyone listening to this watched. It was like 1 or 2 years ago. It was a London game between like the Jags and maybe the Falcons, and it was essentially like Toy Story characters were the players.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was a live rendering of what was happening on the field, and it's really just for like kids who don't, or like people who don't follow football, but like Disney products to I guess watch the game. And that's what this game's going to be. It's going to be like Simpsons characters, or just some characters without faces just being the players themselves, as like they have all this player tracking data and they have all the character models. So if you are a fan of the Simpsons and you don't really know the players and you find watching football troubling, this is the game for you in that sense. So that's what that's going to be like. I guess Bart Simpson is going to be like the coach of the Bengals or something like that.
Yeah, Bart is, and then Homer's, I think, the other one. Is that what they're doing with it?
Yeah. Which I thought, like, I've never watched like a full episode of The Simpsons. That's just a secret I have. Homer, I do know though, like, yeah, like I'm a huge fan of Futurama, which is made by the same people, but I've never like seen a full episode.
Yeah.
I thought Homer had like some affiliation with the Bengals though. Like there was a picture of him like lifting up his shirt. He has "Go Bengals" on his chest. So I figured that Homer would be on the Bengals side of this, but I guess they got Bart.
Yeah, they got Bart, but yeah, man, you gotta, man. Some of the, I mean, that's dated now, some of them, but there are some episodes in the early and mid '90s where Conan O'Brien was one of the writers of the show. Mm-hmm. And oh man, there were some episodes in there that are just absolutely legendary. I don't know, I'm dating myself though. When I remember when that show came out in the late '80s, early '90s, and it was like, this what is this? And it was just this huge deal, and it. Folks probably remember this Fox lineup. It was In Living Color, and then it was, I believe, The Simpsons, and then it was Married with Children on Fox that night. Big Samsung ad right there for everybody. That was on Fox night, Sunday night. It was a real big thing where, man, it was all edgy comedy. It was all good stuff. Anyway, Simpsons and Bengals and Cowboys are all going to be on display Monday night, but some news here. Just season gets worse and worse for Money Mac here. He is on IR because of a groin injury. Bengals bring in a couple of familiar names: Cade York, who I believe used to be with the Cleveland Browns, if I'm not mistaken, and Andrew Stuber. So, John, you want to kind of get us up to speed on this one? First
of all, I think it's got to be the first season in a long time where the Bengals have had a punter and a kicker injury in the same season, because going back to training camp, that was when Pratt Robbins had the hip flexor, which paved the way for Ryan Rico to win that job. But yes, Cade York was a mid-round draft pick by the Browns in 2022. I think he had one good moment with the team in week 1 of that season, and they kind of copied the whole, that's why he drafted kicker, whatever the case may have been. Cade York was not good with the Browns. He made like 75% of his field goals as a rookie. He was cut, I believe, he was cut before week 1 of 2023. I don't even think he kicked in 2023. Yeah. He was jobless. Yeah. And then he became the Commanders kicker for week 1 of this year. He went 0 for 2 in his debut. This is such an amazing irony Sunday here, because the last time the Bengals had a kicker injury was Randy Bullock, when he quote unquote injured his calf after missing the chip shot against the Chargers in week 1 of 2020. The guy who replaced him was Austin Seibert, the guy who was drafted by the Browns a year prior, was terrible, was a bust, and was cut and became the Bengals kicker replacement. The next time the Bengals have a kicker injury, they go back to another Browns bust at kicker in Cade York. And Cade York this year, after he was cut by the Commanders, was replaced by who? Austin Seibert.
Austin Seibert. Yep. It is full circle. I was wondering if you're going to bring it back to Austin. Yeah. Yeah. Time is a flat circle, as they say. And so Evan McPherson on IR with a groin injury. I mean, at this point, it's kind of like, I don't know, man. I don't know what else could really take place here for the Bengals that's going in a negative direction. And obviously it wasn't. Do you have any indication or any just, I don't know, conspiracy theory type of thing that this was maybe a lingering thing and causing some of the issues throughout the year, and maybe it just came to a head this last week? Or what? I mean, what do you think about that?
That is interesting for sure, because I didn't even think about that, because we didn't see him get injured against the Steelers. He just kicked, I think he kicked one field goal in the game, and it was just extra points. He didn't really have a chance to get some redemption off of the bye week, but it didn't look like he was injured at all. This could have been something that he felt after the game, and then they ran some tests on it, and then I mean, just like Amarius Mims back in the preseason, he didn't realize he was hurt in that preseason opener, but then all of a sudden he's out for 4 weeks with, I believe it was a pec injury. So it could have been something like that. I tend to believe it's along those lines. He didn't show up on the injury report at all during the season, so he didn't get any official treatment at practices. It's possible, I guess, that they hit it, but I don't think his misses had anything to do with like a potential groin injury. If anything, like if he was like because his explanation for missing left was that he was overcompensating, and if that overcompensation over time led to his groin getting strained, maybe that's the case. But no, I think this is a relatively new injury and really just an unfortunate way for the season to end for him.
Yeah, that's more what I'm kind of getting. And I don't think the team was hiding anything. I don't want to hint that. I think it's more, maybe it was just like McPherson's, it's a little thing, but it's a little thing that disrupts the whole mechanics of everything. Or like you said, maybe it's just, I mean, it's almost like if your wheel alignment on your car's off, your tires start to rub the wrong way. And then all of a sudden when it's not riding all that bad, all of a sudden one day it's like, oh man, this is really bad. So I don't know. I just, when I saw that injury, I'm like, man, maybe I'm just looking for an excuse for some of the struggles that we've seen this year. and that's my approach to it. But look, we talked about it at the beginning. The Bengals season is, I mean, we've said it for like a month now. It's on a lifeline. It's on a lifeline. I mean, it is, to have any sort of chance, they got to win out, and they got to have a lot of help. And they didn't get help from the Broncos this last Monday. So this week, man, I mean, what's it going to take? I mean, it's going to obviously have to take, can you force a freaking punt? Can you stop somebody? That's obviously part of it, but what else are you thinking are the keys to this one? And do you see the Bengals being able, the schedule sets up where they can go on a run, but it's just like, man, every time they go out there, you're like, how many points are they going to give up this week?
I suppose the only times this defense has looked competent is against the very worst offenses that the NFL has to offer. And Cooper Rush not just diced up the Bengals a couple years ago. Like, he's been pretty decent so far this year in the games that he's played. The one thing that the Bengals have going for them is the fact that CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks didn't practice today. Like, they have a shoulder and knee injury respectively. So you'll know at this point in time if they're going to be available. And if they're not, obviously that makes the Cowboys offense less lethal. Their running game is, I think, underrated. Like, people are clowning it because obviously they don't have like a true game breaker, but Rico Dowdle has not been terrible. I think he's been his success rate has been relatively high. There just hasn't been a lot of explosive plays. The offensive line has some pieces too. So it's still an offense that, when fully healthy, can easily put up 30 points against this Bengals defense. And that just, again, creates the same old story. Like, the Cowboys defense, fortunately, though, is all in that range of incompetence along with the Bengals. They have Micah Parsons, though. Like, he's their Trey Hendrickson and then some, right? So someone that can line up really anywhere along the defensive line and win any one-on-one matchup. He's an athletic mismatch for even competent athletes, and the Bengals don't really have that along the offensive line outside of Amarius Mims, and especially with Orlando Brown continuing to play hurt, and we don't even know if he's going to play in this one, if in case they may want to shut him down or whatever the case may be. So it's the same goals, though. It's just trying to outscore the opponent because the defense can't really do anything to stop it. And Cooper Rush, despite being a backup, he can get the job done. And if he has enough receivers out there, the Bengals need to be prepared to score 30 points, at least 30 or 40 points every single week.
It's basically going to take for them a Herculean effort from the defense. But I mean, I think if you get some combination of 2 turnovers and you force 2 punts, or you get a turnover and force, multiple punts, I think then you're going, okay, this is going the Bengals way. But I was just blown away last week, John, against the Steelers, that this defense is, I mean, the poor angles, the lack of awareness of what's going on deep plays, allowing small plays to, I mean, if you're going to allow the little dump off passes to Najee Harris and whomever else, if you're going to allow those, okay, well, you limit them to, whatever, 5-6 yards and swarm tackle, that sort of thing. And you go, okay, this is what we're giving up. I mean, those plays were just gashing them. And there was just nobody around. And it's blowing my mind as to how this is the case. Lou Anarumo this week, kind of fell on the sword and said it's on me, and then took accountability and all of that. But it's not netting results, and it's not netting different results. And in fact, it's just, it's all seemingly getting worse. I guess, like you said, the only saving grace that this defense has is they've beaten backup quarterbacks. They've beaten other teams that, like you said, aren't necessarily world beaters on offense. But I'm blown away at the lack of progress, not even lack of progress, the regression of the defense. And it just seems like there's a lot of, it's either nobody knows where they're supposed to go, nobody really, or a disinterest in tackle, or maybe some combination of both. I mean, I kind of just last week, I just kept kind of going, what's going on here?
It's a combination of young players who are either injured or who haven't developed enough under this coaching staff, or maybe weren't really given a chance to be their full selves because they were drafted into being different positions, combined with players from those playoff years in 2021 and 2022 not being the same. Sam Hubbard is cooked. Yep. Jermaine Pratt is pretty much on his way to being there. And the new additions this year, just they aren't fits. They have no answers. And it's, I think, a realization of that leads to what looks to be pretty bad effort, knowing that you aren't good enough, knowing that you don't have counters to the problems that you continue to incur regardless of who you play. Obviously, it all starts with the defensive coordinator, and Lou is definitely part of the problem, and that's undeniable. But there's definitely personnel issues here that I think most coordinators would find it tough to overcome. But unfortunately, here it's just a complete loss of belief in what the vision was, and that's what you see. I think you're muted.
I said, yeah. It's a good point about where the defense is and who the cast of characters is right now. I mean, at this point, it's scratch and claw to get a turnover, or the Bengals have to play keep away on offense, but they score and inevitably the other team scores. I mean, it's just maddening. But as of now, I mean, I know we've got a little ways away here, and you rightfully pointed out Parsons obviously a key, and depending on the wide receivers who's there, those are keys. What are you feeling on that? I mean, do you think the Bengals pull this one out because of going up against a backup quarterback? Do you think I don't know, there's somehow lessons learned from this Steelers game and they carry it over, or are we just doomed to keep thinking, man, this team's going to be better than what they're putting out there, but maybe they're really not?
Outside of like the issues this year, I do like to look at history a little bit. The last time the Bengals beat the Cowboys was in 2004. The last time the Bengals beat the Cowboys in Dallas, 1988. 1988.
Wow. Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, they obviously don't play very often because it's the NFC, AFC and whatnot, but they cannot win in Jerry World, regardless of what actual stadium it is. I guess this time they don't have to deal with the light shining into their face at 5 in the afternoon because it'll be at night. But that I mean, I can't really ignore that. That's a historical trend. But no, even if CD doesn't play, Jalen Tolbert, really explosive receiver, I think a mismatch against most of the Bengals cornerbacks at this point. Jake Ferguson, competent tight end. I don't want to overrate Cooper Rush because he hasn't been typically that great, but again, people are talking about Russell Wilson like he found the fountain of youth, and it's the Steelers' offense is the next best thing since sliced bread. It's relative to who this defense is. They can make anyone look good, and even if you are the Cowboys and you're not too confident about your offense, it is a boost to play this Bengals defense. So I have no choice but to assume that the Cowboys are going to score at minimum 4 touchdowns, right? And it's probably going to be like 31 points in their end. It's just a matter of if the Bengals can take advantage of a equally bad defense for the Cowboys. And I feel like they definitely could. There's definitely pressure on Burrow in this offense to be as aggressive as possible. And maybe because you have a new kicker who you don't know if you can trust, you're going to see more aggression on 4th down. Whereas if the drive does not end in 6 points or 7 points, it is a failure. Maybe that just changes a little thing. So I feel stupid for predicting the Bengals are going to win this game, but they do have a lot of advantages with their offense against this Cowboys defense if they can somehow stop Michael Parsons. If Michael Parsons takes it over, though, I don't see the Bengals outscoring the Cowboys. So it really hinges on that.
Starting quarterbacks for the Dallas Cowboys 20 years ago in 2004 were Vinny Testaverde and Drew Henson. Those are guys who started games for the Cowboys in 2004, and a young third string quarterback on the roster named Tony Romo was on the roster too. But
I don't know, Anthony.
Yeah. What? Come on, Jim. You know what? I'm screw it. I'm calling a win. I think they'll make it interesting towards the end of the season here. They've gotta. I mean, there's while they're top heavy and why we've overrated this roster, there still is too much talent to be 4-8 at this point. I don't know that they'll win out, but again, we talked about the schedule last week, John. I mean, it sets up to a situation where the Bengals, if they do win out, there's an opportunity, right? You've got the Cowboys on the road, again, a place you haven't won, in forever, like you said. You go to Tennessee. I don't like the 2 road games there. Then you host the Browns, who are struggling, although Jameis has made them pretty interesting. The Broncos game is huge. And then, of course, you end it with the Steelers on January 5th. So if somehow you were able to rattle off 5 wins and 4 of those are in conference, 2 of which are in division, all of a sudden that could make things a little bit more interesting. You pretty much got to have, for sure. I mean, well, you got to have them all, but the Denver, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, you got to have it. And they've shown that they can hang with anybody. They've shown that again, 8 of their 12 games are 1-score possessions in which they are 1-7. And then, they've won 3 other games. So they can hang with anybody. It's, can you finish everybody? Can you beat everybody? I think this is a game that they should win. I think this is a game that they will win. I have no idea what to predict for a score on this one, but I do think the Bengals, this is ridiculously long. Come on, let's go get a win.
And if they don't, it will confirm that this is the first losing season for them since 2020. They went 9-8 last year, if you can believe that. They'll lose on prime time. I think they're 4-20 all time on the road on Monday Night Football or something like that. They rarely win in these situations. Losing record, losing on the big stage, losing to a team that has typically been blown out at home this year, and Jerry Jones looks miserable while doing so. All of that just would add more fuel to this fire that's clearly brewing right now in Paycor Stadium. I know we talked about last week how important that game was in the Zach Taylor era. The hits just keep coming, man, and that's why, if nothing else, like for Zach's sake, that this is a win that he needs to have for just the perception of everything that's going on.
I'm interested also to see what happens if and when a field goal opportunity arises this week. Mm-hmm. And if it's a wonky score, they score a touchdown and there's an extra point opportunity, you just go for 2 because of, bringing in kickers short week and guys who may or may not have struggled. But then again, you're in a dome. So, that's a little more friendly for kickers that have been around the league too, but that's going to be kind of a big thing. So that's, aside from having Cooper Rush in the game, unknowns at the wide receivers for Dallas, and Evan McPherson now on IR, there's just kind of a lot of moving parts where it's like, man, I mean, I'd try and guess a score, but it would probably be something weird, I think. So there might be some extra go for it's. There might be some extra go for twos this week by the Cincinnati Bengals, depending on the situation.
I hope that I can speak for a lot of people when I say if it is 4th and 5 at the 35, don't send Cade York out there. Just give it to Joe and just let him see what he can do. Like at this point, unless you need a field goal to win the game or the Tide, or if there's like 2 seconds left and you're in range, don't send Cade York out there. We want to try to watch these games. Just give it to Burrow.
This is not only funny, but I think this is pretty awesome. This comment by Wayne Kelsey Knudsen here saying, damn, I'm even losing in Madden right now. I think this is pretty cool. Not that he's losing. I hope you pull out the win here, Wayne. No, but I picture Wayne, maybe in my mind's eye here, I picture Wayne playing Madden maybe on mute and then watching us or listening to us on his phone or something like that, which I think is pretty cool that he's playing Madden and listening to us, watching us live. I don't know. That's just a pat on my own back, I guess. But let's drop the mic and get out of here, John. We've been here almost an hour and we've talked about a lot. What do you got for us?
You know what? We didn't mention him, and I feel like we should. So my mic drop is going to be a shout out to Trenton Irwin, who was released this week and is not being brought back to the practice squad. He's apparently garnering interest from other teams. And it's always fascinating whenever I see an undrafted free agent last a decent period of time in the NFL. He came into the league in 2019. He's been with the Bengals since 2019, even though he was signed by the Dolphins. But a guy who worked his way up from the practice squad for 2 to 3 years, earned a niche role with his team, earned trust from Joe Burrow, as hard as that is. It didn't end well necessarily this season. He only played in 7 games, had 3 receptions, clearly lost a little bit of a step. He's 28 now, but again, for undrafted guys whose careers typically don't last more than 2 years at most, 5-6 years going on, and had some really good moments for this team, had 4 touchdowns in the season and earned a role in one of the best offenses in the past couple of years. So shout out to Trenton Irwin for his time here, and hopefully he can continue his career going forward.
I like that one. And, I got a soft spot for the overachievers, right? The guys who come in and overachieve. There's all kinds of players you can go through Bengals history that have done that. The list goes on and on and on, but good player simultaneously. And oddly enough, a guy who may or may not have taken his roster spot. I do want to shout out Yoshi, who had a touchdown catch and a really nice catch. He took a shot against the Steelers, and it's been an up and down year for him. There were some somewhat high expectations for him, but I thought he showed up pretty nicely in a game that the Bengals needed to have and needed to produce on offense. So best wishes, yes, to Trenton Irwin. We never got him on the show. I know he did a few other shows. I wish we would have had him on, but a shout out to Yoshi as well, who is somewhat replacing him in some ways here, and had a pretty decent week against the Steelers. But that's going to do it. The Bengals take on the Dallas Cowboys on Monday Night Football. We'll probably try and be back, John. I don't know if, John, you're available Friday. Maybe we can do some listener questions or something Friday if people are interested. Probably a lot of outrage, so maybe people are interested. So we'll be back with all kinds of stuff from us, from the others on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Go subscribe to that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in live. Thanks for listening after the fact. I'm Anthony. He's John. We'll talk to you later.